Now, some players I see from here to the top, they have too wide, right? This would be kind of swing type number one. What would too wide would be? That would be on the way down, the shaft gets too far from the shoulder and the club head's taking too much of sort of a U shape into the golf ball, too wide of a circle. Now, why does that happen? That happens because the right arm for them is straightening too soon and the right wrist is straightening too soon and the club head is on too wide of an arc. The opposite would be players that get too narrow. They bend the right arm too much, they fold the wrist too much, and they're too narrow. They would have much more of a V, if you can imagine a V of the club head, very steep on the way down, very narrow. Now, you don't really want either end of the spectrum. What you want is neutral. Now, the key here is to get to neutral, you have to feel the opposite of your issue. All right, so I've been waiting probably literally 10 years to find a right wrist training aid that I would fall in love with. I have this precision impact training aid that I have been testing now for the past couple of months to make sure I like it. This right wrist training aid, I'm telling you, I've tried them all, is unbelievable. You put this on your right wrist and you'll notice when I make a backswing, it gives me some auditory feedback and I can set my right wrist about as far back as I can, and it locks that angle in. It enables you to create the right wrist bend during the backswing, and also because of this little ball here, I can go up and down when I do it. It's absolutely freaking brilliant, and I've been using this a lot. It's gonna help your impact a ton. You go down below, you click the little link down there for Precision Pro, and you grab one of these. I'm telling you, you're gonna love it. There's a little coupon code in there, you get 20 bucks off. Keeping the right wrist bent back, okay, is the key. So there's two types of golf swings that I see when it comes to the downswing arc and loading the shaft in transition. Type 1 that I see most often are the golfers that have too wide of an arc and they throw too soon, usually don't have shaft lead impact, contact issues, etc. And then there's the golfers who are too narrow, which they get too narrow on the way down, also presenting some contact and direction control issues. So if I take my setup and you imagine like a circle, maybe Danielle, we could put like a circle around my body. That's how I would look at a swing arc from face on. So if I swing the club around me, it's gonna take a circle on the way back and on the way through. Now that circle can be a wider circle, so farther, or it can be a more narrow circle. What good golfers do, and we'll put this on some Adam Scott and some pictures here of side by side, is the downswing arc, how they load the shaft in transition, is a bit more narrow than on the way back. And that specifically comes from two pieces. That's the trail arm and then the trail wrist. So if we just take a setup here with me, and I'll talk you through these motions of where you're at and then how to fix both ends of the spectrum. But we want to know what neutral is first, right? And so what neutral is, if you look at a good swing, we go back to left arm parallel. The trail arm, if you were to measure it, is typically going to be somewhere around, let's say 120 degrees bent. And then the trail wrist will be bent back, not all the way, but about 75% of the way. Now, if you look at that same good golfer, by the time they get to left arm parallel in the downswing, both the right arm and the right wrist have increased bend. And you'll see that from face on. So that right arm, when we go back, is at 120 at left arm parallel. By the time we get to left arm parallel during the downswing, it's at 90, right? So it's 120, 90, 120, 90. So it's increased its bend by about 30 degrees. And that's why I like to look at it from that position on the way back to that position on the way down, because it's evident to see that. So when you look at how far back the club head is or where the shaft is on the way back, you would see that the shaft, as the right arm folds a bit more, would do what? That would get closer to my shoulder as I load in transition. Now, as that right arm's folding from 120 to 90, the right wrist is bending back and up. So the wrist bends back, extension, like this, and it bends up, which is radial deviation, back, up. And when you do them together, it goes on like a 45-degree angle, like that. So as my right arm's going from, so here's 180, my right arm, during the takeaway is like 150, okay? Then it's 120 here. As it's going from 120 to 90, that right arm is increasing bend, the right elbow's underneath the left, and the shaft's getting closer to my shoulder. Now, as I'm doing that, there's some pressure and body motions going down and forward. That's the loading of the shaft, right? That's what you want to feel in transition. So that would be a neutral checkpoint. Now, some players I see from here to the top. They have too wide, right? This would be kind of swing type number one. What would too wide would be? That would be on the way down, the shaft gets too far from the shoulder, and the club head's taking too much of sort of a U shape into the golf ball. Too wide of a circle. Now, why does that happen? That happens because the right arm for them is straightening too soon, and the right wrist is straightening too soon, and the club head is on too wide of an arc. The opposite would be players that get too narrow. They bend the right arm too much, they fold the wrist too much, and they're too narrow. They would have much more of a V, if you can imagine a V of the club head, very steep on the way down, very narrow. Now, you don't really want either end of the spectrum. What you want is neutral. Now, the key here is to get to neutral, you have to feel the opposite of your issue. To get to neutral, you have to feel the opposite of your issue. So if I took two golfers, one golfer was overly wide and one golfer was overly narrow, and I said, okay, golfer one, you feel what golfer two's doing. They'd probably end up pretty much neutral. I say golfer two, you feel what golfer one's feeling. They'd end up neutral. That means if you're too wide when you start down with the right arm, right wrist, you need to feel like you get more narrow. If you're more narrow on the way down, you need to feel like you get more wide. How do you do that? You do that by feeling the right arm increasing or decreasing its bend and the right wrist increasing or decreasing its hinging. Okay? Now I'm going to talk you through how to do that, but that's what you need to feel. How much you need to do, you need to answer for yourself based on video. Now you know what the checkpoint is. What should I get to? I should get my right arm from 120 to 90. The shaft should be getting closer to my shoulder. The wrist should be bending back and up. The knuckles are bending up and back towards my forearm or my shoulder, just like the pictures. How much you need to do, you need to record yourself and see and dial that volume up or down. So let's start with the players who are too wide, right? Too wide early. So this would be, you go up to the top, the right arm gets too straight, the right wrist gets too straight, and then the shaft is on too wide of an angle. From there, typically the low point is going to be behind the ball. You get fats or thins. It's going to look like a little flippy past impact. Probably some inconsistent direction from there too. You're not really compressing the ball. It's kind of inconsistent day to day. You need to feel more narrow. Here's what I would do for you. I've got a 7-iron. You could do something similar to this. This is the pattern. I see this 90% of the time, probably 80 to 90% of the time. 10 to 20% of the time, someone's too narrow and I'm getting them wider, but I typically see too wide. So what I would want you to do is take your setup, go back to left arm parallel, pause, okay, in this particular position, left arm parallel to the ground. You know, the shaft angle is just in line with the golf ball, just on a neutral angle. And you want to have your right arm about 120 here. Right wrist is bent back and up some amount. Now from here in transition, I want you to feel like your right arm goes from 120 to 90 and the wrists hinge up and back. Now as I'm doing that, notice my pressure is pushing down and forward into my left leg. So my body's going slightly down and forward. Right arm, right wrist bend, pressure down and forward. Now, the wider I am here with this shaft, the easier it is to get some of that motion coming down. So you don't want to be like way overly hinged here beyond 90, then you got nowhere to go. You got to give yourself some margin here. So at left arm parallel, have the shaft and arm at 90 or just past, just wider than 90 ideally, and then you can create the load in transition. So I would do one or two where you feel that, and then the next level we're going to put to that is adding a downswing. So I'm here, left arm parallel, feel that load, let the club head go. Left arm parallel, pause, feel the loading back to left arm parallel, and then let it go. And now I want to feel that same sensation with a fluid motion. So now I'm going to go to left arm parallel, pause, no pause on the way down, but still feel that same thing. It's going to feel like the shaft is getting closer to your shoulder. The angle between the shaft and the arm are narrowing. Now listen, okay, I see 1,000 swings a month. I do a gazillion lessons. I understand that some players are too narrow. Like I mentioned, this is just for the wider. This is if you're early release and you're throwing, you need to feel narrow to get to neutral. Do I actually want you to get that narrow? No. You have to feel narrow to get to neutral. So if you're posing like where it's actually supposed to be, it's never gonna look right when you're actually hitting a ball. You have to overdo it to get to neutral. So if you're wide, you have to overdo the narrowing just to get to neutral, okay? So when we're looking from here, I like that sort of sequence. Pause, right? Pause, create it, swing through, pause at left arm parallel, create it, So the right wrist is bent, or the right arm's bending, the right elbow's underneath the left elbow, the shaft is getting closer to my shoulder. Now as I'm doing that from there, my shaft is still shallowing some, right? I'm still getting a shallowing motion, I'm not steepening from there. And then once I can learn to swing through from there, I'm gonna create that same motion without the pausing, and it's gonna feel too narrow. Your right arm and right wrist are gonna feel too narrow. That's the point, right? If you're normally too wide. So once I do 2 rehearsals, then I do a rehearsal, right, without the pause on the way down, I'm gonna hit with those same feels. Right arm bending, right wrist hinging up and back, pressure's going down to my left foot, and this is happening from left arm parallel during the backswing to left arm parallel during the downswing. So load the shaft. And now when you look on video, what you should see when you record yourself, your club head should travel, right? You're on the wide arc, you're on the U pattern. You're gonna feel like a V, like it's gonna feel very narrow to you, and it should look like perfect. Now I'm already kind of in between, so I'm kind of where I should be. So when I feel a little narrow, I'm gonna be a little narrow. But the point is for you, that should get you to neutral. You feel like the club head's coming down in the ball more than normal, and you're much more narrow. That's what it should feel like. If you're on the wide thing, you probably had a hard time taking divots. You should be able to take some divots and compress the ball with this. So that's how you correct the wide angle. Feeling that loading of the shaft getting closer. Now, if you're on the opposite end of the spectrum and you get too narrow, so we said the arm should be 120 at left arm parallel, and then it's at 90, and the shaft should load in transition, right? Now, if your right arm is like 45 and the shaft's real narrow here, from the down the line, your shaft's gonna be too vertical and too steep, but B, you're gonna have that narrow at the bottom. So what do you need to feel to get to neutral is like you straighten your right arm and you throw your right wrist sooner. Now again, do I actually want you to go on the opposite end of the spectrum? I do not, but I know, because I do this a lot, that you need to feel like you do that to get to center, okay? So now, you're too narrow, your right arm's too bent, the wrist is too hinged. You need to feel like from left arm parallel to the top, and in fact for you, I would go all the way to the top, and as you start down, feel the right arm straightening, and feel the club head actually starting to feel like it's passing your hands a little sooner. So you're gonna feel like at impact, you're kind of lining it up more 90 degrees, because normally if you're too narrow, you probably have the handle too far forward. You're hitting down too much, too steep. You need to feel from here like you're widening the circle. You're straightening your right arm sooner. So this right arm's gonna feel like it goes 90 at the top, and you're kind of getting it all the way down to 120. Understanding that's not actually gonna happen. You just wanna have it, 150 at impact, but you have to overdo that. So you're too narrow, you wanna widen it all the way up, straighten the right arm, throw the right wrist sooner. And this is gonna get you from a V to more like a U pattern. Now for me, that's better, because if anything for me, my issues, if I'm not kind of where I want, is I would lack a little bit of turn on the way back. My right arm would get a little bit too bent, and I'd be a little bit too narrow. Now that's a good, like, if you had a problem, you'd probably rather live on that end of the spectrum. But for me, because I get too narrow, I need to feel like I'm straightening my right arm sooner, and if anything, throw the wrist angles a little sooner. What we want to see at impact, if we look at these good golfers, is the hands are like over their left leg. And then the shaft, so that lead arm is still in front of the shaft at impact. The shaft and lead arm line up just past the left leg. When you add body rotation, they're still about in a straight line, 45 past impact. So if anything for me, I get the handle too far forward, and so I'm gonna feel like I throw it a little bit sooner, and that's what you need to feel if you're on the narrow end. So up to the top, straighten the right arm, throw the right wrist, widen that circle. It would be a good idea to put the ball on a tee for some of these too, and feel like you're kind of clipping the ball off the tee and taking less divot. So that feels really nice for me, because if you watch me normally when I overdo it, I could take a divot that's freaking, a couple inches deep. So it just depends on what end of the spectrum you're at. Any swing fault you have, you want to follow this recipe, okay? You want to know what's neutral, like where am I supposed to get to? Like what's the goal here? And I'm telling you the goal is just like these pictures. 90 with so the right arm's 120, the shaft and arm are, roughly 90 degrees, shaft's right on point. And from there to left arm parallel, I'm pushing down in my left foot, my right arm's bending, and the shaft's getting slightly closer to me. You don't have to worry about what you do from there through. It's create that motion. So if you're too wide, like 80% of my players are, you need more of that. That's how you load the shaft in transition. 1 or 2 rehearsals, hit a ball on video, see where you're at, and then do more or less, adjust right away. If you're too narrow, you're the 10 to 20% I see, you're like me, you need to feel like you widen right away. How much? Check yourself on video, hit those same checkpoints. Okay, so training aid wise, when we're talking loading the shaft in transition, we have the right arm and we have the right wrist. Now, I haven't found anything for the right arm that I love at this point in terms of the straightening or folding of that to show you guys, but the right wrist for the loading, this precision impact is literally perfect. So the clicking you should hear, if you're normally too wide and need to do the narrow route, when you go back to left arm parallel, we're gonna click it a few times. So it's like 75% of the way back. But here's the cool thing. As I fold my right arm, as I press down and forward, my right wrist should bend back and up. So watch and listen to this. See how that clicks more in transition? So that's that loading piece of this training. As you can see, it puts my wrist in a position where it's fully bent back from there. I can just release this. So if you are looking for something to help and you can't quite get the feel, I love this. We have the link in the description down below with our coupon code. You get 20 bucks off. This is the best way I've seen to, and the best way I've found to do this. So back to left arm parallel, and then hear that click as my right wrist goes back and up, as my right arm folds and I push down and forward. And then you can hit, and this is the beautiful thing about this. This is what makes me like a training aid the most. You can hit with it on. So I can feel that same sensation even with a ball. Click it back, and you hear that click an extra time as I work in the transition. So just wanted to give you guys a little add-on piece. If you're struggling to feel it, this precision impact training aid, we'll put the link in the description down below. So those are the differences you should see. That's how you load the shaft in transition. It depends a lot on where you're coming from. If you're not sure where you're coming from, or you just want help improving it, go to cogornogolf.com. We're still doing our free 14-day trial, so you can send me your swings. I'm gonna personally analyze them. Say, hey, here are your main priorities, 1, 2. Here's how we're gonna fix them. Here's your drills. Here's your reps, and it's absolutely risk-free. So if you don't like it, you don't pay anything. Okay, so you got 14 days to try it out. No brainer to do that. If you guys have any comments, as always, or questions, just leave them down below. Thank you guys for watching.